Hi, thank you. Welcome to this panel, which is Innovating for a Cleaner, Greener and Better Future. I have with me Matthias Rebellius, who is a member of the Managing Board and the Chief Executive of Smart Infrastructure at Siemens. I've forgotten I didn't ask you how to pronounce your surname. Dominic Warre, who is the Executive Vice President at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I have Emma Stewart, who is Sustainability Officer at Netflix. Mike Watt, who is Director of Chrome Enterprise for the EMEA region at Google. And I have Mark Newman, who is Chief Executive at Chemours. Just to get us started, please, keeping it very brief, kind of under a minute, if you could each in turn add anything that you want about your role to that introduction, and also would be great right at the beginning if you could give a specific example of an innovation, either a product or an aim that you or your team are currently working on in the climate or sustainability space, just to kind of anchor. So if we could start with Matthias.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Rachel. And yeah, great to be here and talking about such an important topic, which of course, for Siemens AG, we drive innovations and sustainability in all of the business we do. We're focusing on industry, infrastructure, and transportation. And I'm responsible for the infrastructure business within Siemens, which is one of the three pillars. And this is highly connected to the topic, because smart infrastructure being sustainable infrastructure. And why? Because it is the combination of when you add more renewable power, you need to have intelligent grids, intelligent buildings, also consuming less, because the equation will only work if we have a more energy efficient infrastructure, as well as the grids which providing the energy from the renewables. And this is also where the innovation kicks in, from my perspective. I could call out many, but one in particular, because hearing from the national grid here in the SVR in the UK, that the amount of grid that needs to be updated, installed, is 4 times what is there today. And huge investments going on. We are working on scale or software which can be on-premise, hybrid, and cloud, to manage the high complexity of decentralized energy generation in the grid. Happy to talk more about later.
Great, thank you. Dominic, appreciate your answer might be a little bit different because you work in a slightly different role, but yeah, if you could.
Well, thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. Hello, everyone. Good to see a few familiar faces in the audience. So the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has about 232 of the leading multinational companies of the world who are championing sustainability. We uniquely have a membership criteria for the club. So if you're not good at doing that, you're not in the club. And I'm delighted that most of our panel are in the club. So thank you very much for that. Apart from Netflix, we can talk about that. But a champion in sustainability in their own right. We also have a network around the world, 6,500 companies and 60 kind of national chapters. So it's actually a pretty interesting ecosystem of what is going on. I'm responsible for climate action, nature, tackling inequality. Uniquely, we ask that we do all of these 3 things at the same time. So climate and nature and tackling inequality all at the same time. One of the things that we just launched last week, which I'm sure will generate some response, is guidance for avoided emissions. And avoided emissions are not anything to do with any offset for your inventory of scope 1, 2, and 3. Totally separate, but how can we find an accounting mechanism to pull more innovation into the space and reward those companies like we have here who are shifting business models, getting more product into society? Happy to talk about that.
Great. Moving on to Emma.
So my job at Netflix is to make entertainment sustainable and to make sustainability entertaining. And what that entails is working across the company to decarbonize our operations at the speed that climate science prescribes, to support our creative partners, filmmakers, writers, showrunners, in accurately reflecting and authentically depicting the changing world around us on your screens, and driving conversation and community around these sustainability stories. So I'm happy to share that at this point we now have over 200 films and television series on the service that spotlight sustainability challenges, but also solutions. And speaking of something we're doing this week, yesterday a new title just launched. It's a comedy series starring Rob Lowe and his son. Rob Lowe plays a very affable, wacky, eccentric climate tech entrepreneur who invents carbon sequestering concrete, which this audience will know already exists, but in the series is indeed fictional. And we're activating a set of sustainability campaigns and assets around that, including working with real climate tech entrepreneurs to promote the title. So when you go home tonight, please look up Unstable.
Mike?
Hello, everybody. I work for a company you may have heard of called Google. I specifically look after something called Chrome OS. There are 3 operating systems on the planet for laptops and PCs. One's Windows, one's Apple, and one is Chrome OS. So if anyone's got kids, you probably know what Chromebooks are. And I represent taking Chrome OS and Chromebooks into the enterprise market. I started this journey about 2 years ago when I discovered with an analyst company that Chromebooks are actually 46% more energy efficient than a Windows or Apple device. So I've really been driving that story out into the market and getting companies to really embrace that sustainability story that we have. I think from an innovation perspective, one of the things we're specifically proud of is we just launched something, or about a year ago, we launched something called Chrome OS Flex. So if you imagine that imagine you're a big company with thousands of devices and you have old Windows devices that are up to 10 years old, you can actually repurpose those with Chrome OS Flex and make them into a brand new Chromebook. So imagine what that, from a sustainability angle, imagine the impact that could potentially have if I could get every company on the planet to do that. So that's really my passion and why I'm here today, to talk to you a little bit about, slightly different, but talk to you about the impact that devices are having on our planet and how we can really move the needle to improve that scenario. So good to meet everyone.
Thank you. Mark?
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me. And Dominic, great to be part of the club. And our company, Chemours, you may not have heard of it, but our vision is that we can create a better world through the power of our chemistry. We think chemistry is critical to the evolutions or the revolutions happening in material science that are driving both the energy transition, think EVs, think hydrogen, where we're really big, but also in data, in high-speed data. So our chemistry enables high-speed data to do a lot of the things you already heard about, which have a sustainability angle. So we're very excited about what we're doing at Chemours. We've announced just recently a significant expansion of our Nafion ion production in France to enable the significant growth in the hydrogen economy. At the center of the hydrogen economy is a membrane. So whether you're making hydrogen from renewable electricity in an electrolyzer, you need a membrane. Or if you're converting hydrogen to electricity in a fuel cell, you also need our membrane. So we like to say we're at the heart of the hydrogen economy. And so much of our innovation is how do we make renewable hydrogen a lot more cost-effective by reducing the use of rare earths, think platinum and iridium.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in a sec.
I'm Jamaican, so I talk a little bit slower. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, going to start asking you stuff now, but anyone who wants to pick up the questions, please do so. So just to kick off, in your various sectors, of which there is some overlap, but not exclusively, what do you see as the barriers to innovation, particularly innovation that is trying to achieve climate goals or sustainable goals?
I'll start first.
Yeah.
There's a lot of regulation around the chemical industry, and it's an industry that people love to hate. And so I think one of the things that we need to think about is how do we have regulation that allows chemical industries to work effectively, sustainably, but bring the chemistry and innovation in material science to enable the work on sustainability.
If I may add on this, regulations is also in the infrastructure, of course, a topic. So how fast or how long does it take to get approval for, talking about solar roofs is perhaps the easier one, but wind turbines, and then also but then grid, an electrical grid to be added somewhere. It's equally difficult than getting a train track. So regulations need to speed up. That's the first thing. The other thing is subsidies is not the answer to everything. And we are looking also, we need to have the right business models applied. Some of the business models would justify the investment into a sustainable technology do not make sense anymore if things are being subsidized. So we should rather talk perhaps later about how we can transform CapEx to OpEx rather than only subsidies. So I would say less regulations, stimulus and subsidies in a well-managed way and at the right time and the right amount.
One challenge we're witnessing, the private sector is known for moving fast, but supply chains also don't adapt overnight. And what we've seen is even after we've proven out through over 100 pilots that we can, as an entertainment sector, swap out diesel generators, which have been used for decades in almost every production of every film and television show you've ever seen. When we prove out using hydrogen fuel cells or we prove out using medium or small batteries, we look at the economics, of course, we look at the operational benefits and downsides, and then we look at the supply. And we will say to the vendor, okay, well, you know what, that worked out quite well. It pencils reasonably. We're willing to pay a premium at this stage. Operationally, this is what we're going to need. We need more mobility. These were not built for moving around. When can you get us the next 6 units in London, as an example? They'll say, come back to us in 2026. And that is not the sort of time frame that we as a company nor the planet can accept. So we announced recently that we've partnered up with Disney, of all companies, to co-fund a nonprofit technology accelerator at Third Derivative to solve this challenge, not just for our companies, but for our entire industry, and then ultimately for adjacent industries that rely on clean mobile power, or just mobile power. That's construction, that's events, that's sports, that's emergency services. And unfortunately, as climate change takes hold, we're going to need a lot more of those disaster response services, which ironically roll in a fleet of diesel generators. So we're hopeful that through this technology incubator, we will start to see that supply come to fruition. And the goal is to have it be economical and widely available for the entertainment sector by 2026, which is lightning speed in this industry. But feels slow to climate advocates, I'm sure, and then to ultimately eliminate diesel generators for the industry at the end of the decade.
Dominic, obviously, the work that you do is quite a lot to do with this kind of thing, which is helping, allowing companies to recognize the sort of full impact of their emissions. Do you have any thoughts on sort of what the barriers to that are and how that impacts innovation?
Yeah, sure. And
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's absolutely fine. Here I am. It's super interesting to hear whether it's on the hydrogen or the digital services or these new kinds of collaborations or indeed on the kind of infrastructure and investment. As you, I'm sure, will know in the audience, like to date and rightly so, the kind of carbon footprint management of companies has been very much about have less of a footprint, lower those emissions, scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3. Absolutely the right thing to do, manage that inventory. What you're already hearing across the panel is, yeah, I get that, but we need to innovate like crazy because we're not going to solve this problem just by doing less bad. We've also got to do a lot more good. And we don't yet have a kind of accounting which allows for impact into society. And that's what these avoided emissions guidelines can do alongside the greenhouse gas protocol. And if you can do that, then investors can see which companies like these are kind of pushing their business models, creating these innovations, doing the right thing, and the capital will be attracted to that, as will policymakers to find the levers, because it's not just incentives, it's not just more capital, it's kind of the whole thing. So that's an area which is proving to be very exciting indeed. We're delighted that Siemens and others have been very closely involved. I know that Google, you see this very strongly in the digital services space as well.
Yeah. I'll give a couple of examples of that. We're working with one of the world's biggest banks at the moment, and they're looking at potentially how they could use Chrome across their estate. And I met with their procurement team yesterday, actually, and I'm a sales director, so one of my questions was, what makes you buy from a company? You know, what are the pillars that I have to overcome to sell to you as a large bank? And the head of procurement, which was amazing, turned around to me and said, I'll buy from you with 3 criteria. One is 33% you have to be an economic fit, so you have to be the right price. 33% you have to be technically capable. 33% you and I have to prove that the choice I make if I pick you as a vendor is a sustainable one. That was a global bank. And I'm seeing that if that had been 2 years ago, you would never have had that conversation. So you know, the tide's changing. Companies are really now starting to make sustainability choices and IT decisions based on sustainability. And I'll just add one other thing. So just to show how big this impact can be, we just sponsored a big survey with the UK government. So the UK government use something like 2.25 million devices across all of their departments. And we were quite interested to work with the government to see how they could change their energy consumption and become more consumable by changing their decision on devices specifically. And by using something like Chrome OS Flex, which I mentioned earlier, we worked out that they could save something like 220 million car miles a year, or 56 million kilograms of carbon a year, just by changing their operating system and changing the way that they consume devices. However, that sounds great, but there's a big barrier. And the big barrier, for example, in the public sector to deploy those devices would be applications. Yeah. They have a lot, you know, if you look at the NHS, for example, Chrome OS is a cloud-based operating system. The NHS, as anyone in the room probably knows who's been to a hospital or a doctor's surgery, they use a lot of applications that aren't in the cloud, that don't reside in the cloud, whether that be an MRI scanner or a CT scanner or whatever it might be. So the barrier for the NHS, even though they know they can change, save a huge amount of money and save a lot of energy, the barrier for them is actually their inherent technology, and they need to change that technology. And that's probably, for me, that's the biggest barrier. It's not the fact that there aren't tools like Chrome OS out there that can really help. It's the fact that how do you get companies to deploy this new technology? Because they all know they've got to make a difference, like that major bank that I spoke about.
And so sort of picking up on the need to overcome barriers, obviously innovation costs money, innovation brings an advantage to the companies that are doing it, but the goals that we're talking about here are sort of planetary and society-wide. So what do you see, if anything, as your companies or larger companies' responsibilities to sort of share that innovation with companies just starting out or who don't have the resources that you do?
I think our focus is how do you make the innovation more affordable, and how do you manufacture it responsibly, and how do you manufacture it onshore? You know, I think we have to also think about how do we bring this to society as fast as possible using the existing supply chain? How do we do it and enable green jobs so society has a very direct benefit? And then how do we scale up fast enough so that we're bringing down the cost? You know, we have the largest installed base of the monomer required to make this membrane for hydrogen. We want to build new plants, but the whole regulatory process of bringing those plants online is really being slowed down. We have the innovation, we have the capital, and in some cases we have more capital being added through, Inflation Reduction Act. But how we actually convert that capital into manufacturing capacity to bring that to market is, I think, the biggest impediment. I also think society has to get this clear that there are going to be some choices in moving from where we are on the energy transition that are not perfect. So let's not wait for something that's perfect. Let's take existing technology and innovation and deploy it more rapidly.
There's also one where I would like to double up on managing high complexity and sustainability. So the people are asking, if we look for industrial customers, they ask us for, of course, efficiency, cost effectiveness, as they did in the past, but now also manage the sustainability across They're in their own operations, in the factory, in the product, but even more in the supply chain, which is the biggest part of it, and then also downstream with the usage of the product. So this is becoming of utmost importance. So it's all about managing higher complexity. How can you manage higher complexity? With digitalization. So you need to have more data across the entire supply chain in the manufacturing process, but also then in the lifetime of the product and even the factory or the infrastructure. And this is about the digital twin. So digitalizing the world to make faster and better decisions. This is the only way how we can manage complexity, and this is also where innovation go in. Now innovation costs money, that's what you said, right? And that's absolutely correct. But also in the past, when you were focusing on purely efficiency and cost effective, it also cost money upfront. There's a big change. Digitalization allows us also to deploy new business models as a service. You know, we talk a lot about this, everything as a service, but if you just look into energy as a service or flexibility as a service, reliability as a service, these are not only terms, there are business models behind where you can reduce the upfront investment and pay as you go, which makes the latest innovation and the deployment of those much more affordable for our customers and societies.
One thing to add is when we set up the sustainability strategy for Netflix, we outlined a set of principles we wanted to abide by, keep ourselves honest. We also set up a Netflix advisory group of sustainability experts from the policy world, the filmmaking world, and the scientific community. So one of those principles is to move fast but ground everything in science. A second is to prioritize scalability over novelty, and I think that's what your question gets to. So when we do something, we tend to then share it. We want others to copy it. One example of that is just recently we announced that we are giving electric vehicles more of the stage they deserve. So we've been incorporating them on screen, these are called picture cars, into more film and television shows. And this is partially self-interested, right? We want to future-proof our shows and make them seem authentic to the world around you. Society is going through one of the biggest transformations in the last 100 years in the transportation sector. But it also creates this wonderful opportunity with companies like GM, who themselves are highly motivated to normalize electric vehicles in society's mental model. And so we partnered with GM to get the word out there about this recipe of how we're doing this. And it was really a welcome conversation for the creators and for the producers, but something they had never really thought about until we prompted the question. So I think, develop the recipe, cook it up, see if it works, and then share it with your neighbors.
Okay.
If your question was about sort of sharing the innovation or stimulating innovation among people who perhaps couldn't afford it, or
yes, and the responsibility of companies to do that if they are able, I think.
So there's a leading Indian auto manufacturer, majors on the three-wheelers and two-wheelers, and decided rather boldly to go completely electric within a very short period of time, inspired obviously by the direction of travel that India is going in. Which is quite remarkable in terms of shifting that economy into a green electrification and green hydrogen economy as well,
Yeah.
And the innovation was to deal with the 100 million customers that they have, not just in India, but across many markets in Africa, not to sell new product, but to invite those customers to come back, drop out the kind of two-stroke engine and put in an electric engine. And that immediately opens up a huge amount of service capabilities, of which larger US corporations and others have seen a massive market and have kind of come around, and it's incredible. So there is a huge amount of innovation and collaboration that takes place along these value chains. You're absolutely right to talk about that supply chain, but that trigger has almost stimulated a whole new kind of industry, which is very exciting, and it's not at all about kind of big guy squashing the small guy. It actually is about kind of the transformation across the piece, and it's delivered a whole bunch of innovation for those on the electric manufacturing mobility side about how they can service that whole new market. So it's just an example.
What of kind of any of this do you guys find that you still run into problems when you're trying to explain why you want to do this sort of thing to your stakeholders or investors or your boards? Like, are there any things that you are still kind of trying quite hard to overcome there?
I'll give you an example. I'm going to tell you a little story, actually. Anyone in the audience been to Cairo? Yeah? Okay. So I took my family on holiday to Cairo a couple of weeks ago, and my daughter wanted to see the pyramids. So we took a short flight to Cairo to see the pyramids. And if anyone hasn't been to Cairo, 30-odd million people, burning tyres in the street, 25-year-old cars going past you on the motorway. It's quite an assault to the senses. I'll put it like that. And we came home, and the next day, my daughter loved it, saw the pyramids, really enjoyed it, asking me loads of questions about how lucky we are to be living in England compared to somewhere like Cairo. So it was a real lesson for her. But we were walking up our street the next morning to get a pint of milk from the local co-op, and there are 3 Teslas up my street. So there are 3 houses who own Teslas up my street. And my 16-year-old daughter turned around and said, "Dad, what is the point? What is the point of buying a Tesla when there's 30 million people burning tyres in the street and driving old cars and not being sustainable in a place like Cairo?" And we had a really, really good discussion about this. And my answer to her was, every single person, you're not going to change the world overnight, but every single person can make a little difference, whether that's, putting the right rubbish in the green bag in the morning for recycling, whether that be deciding to pick, the right supply chain if you're a manufacturer, whether that be someone like me, passionately driving that Chromebooks are more sustainable than other devices. Whatever that might be, if we can all individually make a difference, then collectively we can save the planet. And that's really the conversation I try and have with every CIO and CTO and CEO. You're not necessarily going to completely change your whole computing state overnight, but you can start small and you can start making differences now. So I just thought that was quite a nice analogy for everything that we're talking about, because I do get a lot of conversations where people say, it's too far gone. It's just, is the difference that I'm going to make actually going to change the world? And I think that's a discussion I'm having and a conversation I'm having a lot more now.
Thank you. I think Matthias wants to say something.
First, a congratulations to having a daughter walking through the world with open eyes.
Yeah.
But this is also what I think the generation stands for. They are watching what our generation is doing, what the generations did in the past. They're watching, of course, also what are other countries doing. But as always in life, we should not stop doing the right thing with just watching what others are not doing or arguing or taking this as an excuse. I know this sounds a little bit optimistic, but I am an optimist and say we better start with ourselves. And when as a global company leader, I'm traveling around the world and see, there are efforts being done and taken in all the countries. They just have different starting positions. So we have to also admit and take into consideration where each and every individual in every country comes from. And also in your street, perhaps not everybody can afford a Tesla. Yeah. And therefore, don't judge people on what they do or what they don't do. Try to make an example and make innovation affordable and also accessible for as many as people in the world, and that's what we stand for.
Rachel, our board is hugely supportive. Obviously, as a manufacturing company, our goal is first, what products are we making? So our focus is that more than 50% of our revenue will come from UN's SDG products that aid UN SDG. So what are you making, and how do you enable others to live a more sustainable life? And how are you making it? So we've committed to a 60% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 and to science-based targets on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. This is not just saying something, it's costing our company hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve this. So I think every company has to say, what am I putting out there, and how does that enable the world to be more sustainable? And then when I look at my own operations, am I running my operations sustainably? Now, we're all talking about emissions, which is important, but I also think, we look at broader societal impact. So for example, we have been very focused on enabling underprivileged students, children worldwide, to get STEM education. In the US, where we're based, there's a significant shortage of STEM talent, which is critical to the sustainability journey. But there's very few people of color in STEM because a lot of the inner city elementary schools have no STEM education. So Chemours has really taken this on. And I personally, as CEO, am very passionate about how we include more people in the journey by making it more broad.
So to this point, and this is actually adapted from an audience question, so if you asked it, I'm not stealing it. If we're talking about innovation, and innovation at the most basic level means doing things differently, quite often that requires having different people in the room than who have traditionally been in the room. And obviously we are talking a lot about environmental goals, but as you said, there's a whole load of other goals that go along with sustainability in the social space, in the governance space. What are your companies doing or are committed to doing to make sure that you have diversity amongst your staff or leadership, which means that, you know, ideas that may not previously have been on the table can now be on the table?
Just to put it bluntly, my compensation is tied to our progress on gender diversity, our progress on measuring our emissions, and on our energy efficiency. So we have made this very tangible for our top 100 executives, including me. So we're very engaged on this. My leadership team is majority female, which is very unusual in the chemical industry. So we're really serious about this, starting from our board all the way down to the front line.
Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, same on our side, of course. We have not only tied also part of our long-term incentives to ESG, but we also have rolled out a company-wide program and communicated also in our sustainability report, which we call Degree, which is covering a lot more than just sustainability or energy efficiency in terms of what we as a company stand for and what we think makes a sustainable business impact going forward. The equity and inclusion is also, of course, one of the dimensions. So is energy efficiency and also resource efficiency, which we should not forget in the equation of, with all the growth happening in the world, that we also need to have the resources supporting this. So we're committed to ESG targets, not only in incentives in our company programs and across all of our organizations.
For Netflix, I cover the E, but have colleagues who actually precede me covering the S. And I think Hollywood, as a locus of excellence in storytelling, realized about a decade ago that it was odd that the world wasn't reflected properly on screen. And that it turns out people like to see themselves reflected on screen, and that they feel more affinity for the characters. They feel more connected and committed to the story, and therefore to Netflix. So the company put an immense amount of effort and thought into, well, how do you do that in an authentic way? And the answer was starting with our own employee base. And so it really was led by our internal talent group, and working extensively to make sure that every hire had a look at the diversity potential for that hire at every level of the company. And then it moved to our external talent group. So who are we casting in these stories? And are they representative of that character, that place, that community, that culture? So it really was about first behind the camera and then eventually on screen.
I think we've probably got time for one more question. So again, from the audience, innovation is important, but how can we speed up phasing out less sustainable or even harmful products and services? Not to go in on you, but I know this is something that your company has grappled with.
So we've committed to a greater than 99% reduction in emissions of fluororganic compounds to the environment, to air and water. And again, this is a big part of our journey in, hey, we're making a hydrogen membrane for a more sustainable planet. We're making EV additives for a higher charge density battery. We're making immersion cooling fluids to make data centers more efficient. How do we make those products with the tiniest possible environmental signature. And so, again, this requires innovation and investment, and it's something that we're hugely committed to. I do think, though, we have to have a responsible debate as a society that these chemistries provide answers for a more sustainable planet today. So let's just focus on not eliminating these chemistries, but making them a lot more responsible. And that's what we're focused on.
Do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I think you touched on, if you talk about the manufacturing and the cycle of tech, for example, there's 450 million devices produced in the world every year. That's brand new laptops, towers, tablets. That's a lot of devices. So I think if you can innovate in the way that they're manufactured to start with, it's talking about sustainability. So, making sure that the factories use, the right renewable energy, or that the packaging is sustainable. So if you get the manufacturing piece a lot better, if you then get the usage of the devices better as well, so you pick devices that use less energy, that helps the planet. But thirdly, I think the really important thing is, where do all of those devices go at the end of their life? And at the moment, a huge majority of them are chucked into e-waste. In fact, in the UK, the sustainable impact of that is actually more than plastics in the UK, which is absolutely huge. So if you can somehow work out a way of reusing those devices and also making those devices so they're potentially modular, which seems to be the future, so that when your device breaks, you can just change the screen or mend it yourself in a sustainable way. I think if you can get those three things right, you're going to make a real difference. And the way to do that is to innovate, as you said, in the data centers, in the manufacturing plants, in the operating system that you choose, but also thinking about how long you keep those devices and not throwing as many away, because that's probably the worst thing that we can do for the environment. So if you can innovate in all of those areas, from devices, with 450 million a year, you're going to make a big difference.
Did you?
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's increasing the lifetime of the product, but also then the recyclability.
Yeah.
Part of our targets we're just talking about is also reuse of recycled material, and then also a robust eco-design, but this is also needs to be built into the product. As a company producing hundreds of thousands of different products, from a small circuit breaker to a train, you can imagine that this now takes some time, but we have to put this into, we did put this into our development programs, that we change products towards being more recyclable and using also recycled material. One concrete example where innovation is supporting sustainability and vice versa, and is, for example, in the medium voltage switchgear. They're all, they have, as insulation, they have air, but then they're less efficient, or they have a greenhouse gas in there. So when we are banning this, we have a technology being launched now, the entire family, completely greenhouse gas free. So that is ready for implementation. Regulations, again, to come back where we started. Regulations and acceptability in the market has to speed up. And also perhaps there's a little bit of a premium that you have to pay for at the beginning for using that technology that will also speed up the acceptance.
We literally have 1 minute left, and I think Dominic.
Yeah, so if the question was how do you speed up kind of innovation in the products and services, I mean, you can see there's a slew of great kind of ideas and activities going on, and it was mentioned, right? So 22 years ago, we created an accounting system for carbon, which was emit less on scope 1 and 2 and 3, and people have gathered around that, and you have science-based targets and all sorts of things. Quite historically, last week, here's the next stage of the accounting, which is how do we account for all of the good products and services you're now putting into the marketplace so that all of the rewards get recognized, and that will speed it up. And that's the avoided emissions guidelines, which you can find on the WBCSD website.
Well, on that note...
I hope it finds the way into the taxonomy as well.
That's the next stage. That's exactly what we're going to do. I was just in Washington this week about having the next guidance from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol looking at this. And thank you for your contributions to that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. The very last thing I will point out is that quite a lot of the questions were also coming through asking Mike, has he ever heard of Linux in terms of your 3 operating systems?
I have heard of that. Yeah. And
there are some people who are very upset it was left out.
As the questioner knows, Linux and Chrome is quite quite a good marriage there. So you can look that up on Google if you want to know more about that.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone. If we could just give a round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you.